Hi, welcome to the BD Roundtable. We're here today with Eric Chin. Eric is the principal at Alpha Creates, a company based out of Australia who help the legal industry with innovation on demand. So I brought Eric on the call today to talk about what are the key metrics that law firms need to be analyzing in order to make better informed decisions. So if you want to hear more about this type of information, head on over to bdroundtable.com to sign up to become a member. When you do, you'll get access to our free private Slack group community full of legal marketers like yourself. So now here's Eric.
It's all great to be here with you and the audience. I'll give you a quick background about me to help you contextualize how I see the market and how I got into it. So I've worked in the legal industry for over 10 years now as a strategy consultant, really just straight out of business school. And over the last 10 years, I have completed about 50 partner strategy retreats and over 30 strategy engagements for law firms. And over the time, I've also seen different strategic waves that have shaped law firms' strategy agenda. In all the strategy engagements I've worked on, it has really been about helping law firms with answering the question on growth. And unsurprisingly, for your audience who are in business development, that's your main job basically, is to help firms with answering that question on how do we grow. While that question has remained unchanged, the how to achieve that growth has changed. So 10 years ago, what that meant was really helping law firms with deciding on practice specialization and then sector specialization. Growth also meant geographic expansion as well, as we help create national law firms and then international law firms to either greenfield offices or mergers and acquisition. And that regionalization and globalization trend, basically, once it's settled, the major strategy agenda for a lot of law firms was really around diversification. Whether it was the rise of NewLaw or law firms looking into parallel professions for diversification opportunities. And in the last 3 years, we've also seen the explosion of legal tech solutions now entering the market, pointing to opportunities really for lawyers and law firms to leverage the tools for efficiency gains. So all of those forces essentially have combined to create a hyper-competitive environment that has now put innovation and technology for the first time on strategy agenda for law firms. So it is more important than ever to make data-driven decisions.
Excellent. Yeah, because I started in the legal industry about 7 years or so. And when I first started, the BD team role was purely reactive, right? The partner would say, okay, we're going to do this event. And then the BD teams would jump into action and prepare all the communications and whatnot. Now, as I slowly get a little bit more, clout with the partners, they're coming to me to ask for some advice, or they're coming to the BD teams to help prepare reports and help discuss the business of law, not just the marketing, right? And part of that is preparing data reports and financial reports and analyzing that. So I'm excited to have you on today to really dive into what are the metrics and what should we really be focusing on when it comes to data analysis. So we're not wasting our time with all this other non-essential stuff. So with your experience advising firms on this specifically, what should we be looking at? Can you run us through some key metrics that we should be keeping our eye on?
Absolutely. And just to take a step back as well, to your point about how you've seen your role transitioning from a reactive to a proactive role. Really, to do that, we need to look at what is actually the role of BD in a law firm. It's actually to help with the buyer funnel. So when you think about it, marketing sets the scene for business development. So if you think about a buyer funnel, there are really 6 stages, from awareness, consideration, shortlisting, final decision, and then assessment of lawyers' performance, and then finally loyalty or exit. So the BD function plays an important role in guiding lawyers to win and keep clients for the firm, which means there are really 3 distinct functions, which will sort of go into what is it that we look for in terms of metrics, right? The first thing that the BD function does is build and maintain your pipeline, your sales pipeline. Secondly, it's positioning practitioners in your firm to win work. And thirdly, once the work is done, it's client relationship management to keep the client. Given those 3 distinct functions, you have BD professionals that specializes in different areas of work. And what I'm hearing from what you're saying is essentially a lot of the different skill sets are pulled in, whether it's the hard skills of business acumen or soft skills of emotional intelligence. And what that really translates to from a day-to-day basic is essentially being commercially astute, ability to pick up your firm's technical capabilities, ramp up on knowledge of the clients and their industries, and understanding the life cycle of the firm's business. From an emotional intelligence perspective, is really around the skills required to help coach lawyers through the buying process, so that they can position themselves to win work and build those relationships with the clients. And ultimately, what that translates to is we need data-driven decisions to help win and retain clients, and to inform how we can get better at winning work. We first have to look at our win-loss ratios, right? That's the first thing in terms of winning work. The second thing is to really to strategize around retaining clients. And to do that, you need to look at a few things from your billing perspective, and that includes the size of the account, so total amount spent per year by the particular client group, the life cycle of the account as well, how long has the client been with the firm, and then the historical payment record of the clients. So those are a few things that if I were you guys would be looking for to inform me on where to win and how to retain those clients and where to retain those clients.
Okay, yeah, so the win-loss ratio, so that's something that BD teams have been tracking since the beginning of time, right? And so, but once we get the client, you said focus on billing. So we all have the billing information available. So what can we drill in a little bit more on that? What can we gain from there? What should we be looking at on the billing? So you mentioned, so total amount spent, obviously. What else can we drill into?
Yeah, there's a few things you could look at from the data of what your firms collect, which is the billing data. The holy grail for law firms and professional service firms, really when you think about it, is cross-selling. The cost of acquiring new clients is actually very high in legal and professional services. So I'm going to share a screen to show an example of mock-up that we have done on the type of data that we help firms look at and analyze. So the first thing we look at is the map here, which shows the internal fee billing. And here's a mock-up of example of Pearson Spectre Lit, for those of you who are Suits fans. So each of the big hubs, as you can see here, represents the partners. And then each of the spoke, so the smaller circles, represent the fee earners that feeds into each of the partners' practice. For example, we have Lewis Lit. And on top of that, the width of the arrows represent the size of or volume of fees contributed by each of the fee earners into each partner. So the thicker that line, the bigger the contribution to each of the partners. On top of that, we've also layered this with the color coding analysis. So each of the color code represent a practice group. What this tells you really quickly is it shows you visually the size of each of your partners' practice. Of course, intuitively speaking, you'd know who has the biggest practice, right? But this tells you really quickly from a visual perspective who has the biggest practice. And secondly, it also shows you as well the leverage ratio for each of those partners. Unsurprisingly, with more mature practices, you have a bigger leverage ratio. And then if you look at smaller partners, or essentially those are usually newer partners, they are at the start of their sort of practice building life cycle, they tend to have a smaller team. And what that shows you from a BD perspective is firstly, who are the ones that need help from a business development perspective to help build their practice. The other thing as well is what this can show you from a network perspective. This is essentially a network of the firm using your billing data, is cross-selling opportunities. For example, you see with Mike Ross, he's used 2 lawyers from workplace relations in his litigation practice. the goal then is how do we encourage for the cross-selling and cross-pollination of fee earners across the firm, because rising tide lift of all boats, right?
Right.
So the goal then is to look at, okay, what are other cross-selling opportunities that we can find from our billing data? How do we encourage or create a situation where we are looking at work that will enable our lawyers to work not just within his or her practice, but also across into other practice areas as well. And this is where you get
Yeah.
cross-pollination of
So
fees.
you would ideally want to see more arrows going away from the person, because that means that they're sharing work across. So you want it to be
You
more
would
divided.
absolutely, you want your fee earners to be contributing to more partners. So for example, this fee earner is contributing in multiple partners, which is
Yeah.
great. How
Yeah.
do we
So
find more
you,
opportunities like that?
yeah, and you'd want to encourage and figure out what that person is doing to, yeah. Now this is great because, you know, a lot of times in our partners meetings, we just share like a table, and it's okay to visualize the data that way. I mean, and like you said, most people kind of have a gut feeling about this.
Yeah.
But it's nice to be able to sit around at a table with the partners and just click through and say, oh, look, you see here, you see here. How about we try and, you know, it makes the conversation run a bit easier.
And the partners love this as well because it's a break from the usual presentation they see on billing data. It helps them really quickly say, okay, this is where I am in comparison to my colleague here, and you know, how do I grow my practice?
But in order to get something like this, you need to really structure the data, right? You need to make sure your data is very clean.
That's correct.
That is often case not the case. Do you have any tips on how we can make sure that the data going in is good?
So this data, for example, is really a lift off the practice management system from example of a client that we worked with. Or even your time recording as well is a really good way, because each of the lawyers will tag the time recording to a particular practice or a particular client, and you can tag it really quickly to which partner is the lead partner for this client. The other thing as well that you could look at is in terms of helping with better targeting for your firms, as well as to look at your fees data for the clients. So this helps with better targeting and account prioritization. And what we've done here is to combine fees billed to each of the clients against the realization rate. So that's a client code. For example, client 0002, we billed $13 million in the last financial year, as an example, of which that particular client has used multiple practitioners across different offices. So what we've done here as well is to code each of the clients' billing data against the realization rate. So violet is good, where you have 90% or greater realization rate. The dark blue is about 80% realization rate, and then light blue is 75% or less realization rate.
Eric, can you just sort of drill into what realization rate means for the non-finance marketers on the call?
So this is where essentially, so there's fees billed and then fees paid. A realization rate is basically the difference between fees billed and fees paid.
Right. Okay.
Which means there's, so what that means is 100% of what you bill to your clients is 100% paid, or 90%, 80%, 75%, because in most cases, the clients will come in and say, hang on, why are we charged this amount of money? Can you break this down into hours worked and who's working on this file, et cetera, et cetera. So the goal then, once you can visualize that data, is from a BD perspective, it's about, okay, where's the 80-20 principle? Focus your effort on where you can get the biggest bang for your buck, and prioritize clients where you have the highest realization rate. You can also code this data using a few different cuts as well. What we've done is we've cut this by offices. You can also cut this by practice groups if you like, but office is an example for some of your audience who have regional presence is really useful. because it tells you really quickly which clients are key clients that have spent across different offices.
Yes. Sorry to jump in. So you talk about realization rate. So that's one metric, but that doesn't really mean, even if a client has 100% realization rate, but we get no profit, right? It's you know, the time spent for the lawyer versus the money we got in. It's, you know, so what are some other metrics that we can look at on the client side to figure out if we really should be spending time on this client?
That's a really good point. The other thing that we find as well is there's a lack of understanding of the cost of opening a file, and also the profitability of a client. You know, you can have a practice that is turning over $2 million, but the profit is only 30%, right? But you can also have a very profitable practice, but a much more smaller practice. So for example, if the lawyers are measured solely on their top line contribution, you know, you could have a practice with over 100 clients charging about $2,000 each, but the cost of opening that file is $100 each. The net profit for that cost for that particular practice is $190,000. But if you have 10 clients charging $20,000 each with the same cost of opening a file, your net profit is $199,000, right? But in terms of what you should be tracking as well from a client perspective, is breaking down the revenue to costs. Have you guys done that?
Not sure. Can you explain what that means? So revenue to cost. You mean like rent, the office space and all that sort of stuff?
So this is where it gets really tricky as well, right?
You're on, right?
How do you attribute, you know, what proportion of the office space is to each of the practice group, etc. But a really rough cut is to really look at the fee earners and sort of their salaries. That's the easiest thing you can do. It's not perfect, but what you're tracking is the time that's contributed by each of the fee earners, and what proportion of that is to this particular client, what proportion of that is to another client. So the other way in which you could do that is basically this kind of analysis. So this is essentially a wheel that gives you a really quick picture view of the firm. Again, we've cut this by a few different ways. You have your office cut as the main cut, and then you can drill down into each of the practice groups within each of those offices, and then by partners. And then you can see, for example, Kevin has a pretty big practice, and he's got all these codes are essentially the fee earners. They contribute to his practice. And then within each of those as well, it's not in this visualization, but you'd be able to sort of quickly look at where each of those fee earners contributes to the revenue. So I'll go back to the first slides, which will essentially quickly tell you, you know, for example, this fee earner is contributing to 4 practice areas or 4 partners. And then you can divide that by 4 essentially.
Right. Okay. All right. Now I have some very specific questions about this, which I'll save for the Q&A. But all of this is nice, but I think many firms are just using Excel, which is okay. I mean, you can set up pivot tables. There's some visualizations you can use. So what are some of the other ways we can present this information that we've just discussed?
So what I've used here essentially is Flourish, which is a really cool visualization tool. And you can put this on your intranet as well. I've got this sitting on our website. Obviously, there's Power BI, Tableau, and ClickView. Those would be really good software that you can look into as well. And really, regardless of the software that you use, coming back to the point that you raised, Will, early in our conversation, it's really about the data points that you have. We need to be really clear about what is it that we're looking for and the type of insights that we are looking for, whether it's the cost of opening a file. For international regional law firms, you know, it could be looking at how could we encourage. It's our goal to encourage cross-office collaboration. So the examples that I've given in this talk is really about cross-office collaboration in that second example? Or is it about cross-selling between partners, and how do we encourage that? The other stuff that we could also look at as well are, debtor days, for example. I've done a piece of work really early on in my career, which is just helping a firm with looking at debtor days of their client segments. And what we found really quickly was, interestingly, the government client segment is really good with paying. So 30 debtor days compared to 60 debtor days for other segments of the markets that they were serving. So that tells you really quickly, from a BD perspective, we should be focusing our effort on the clients that are really good with paying quickly.
Yeah. So with your experience with the legal tech, I think with COVID, we've seen a big issue with collections and cash flow. Are there any software available or systems or new platforms where the clients pay ahead of time, sort of like in an escrow account, and then we do the work, and then once everyone's happy, then the money gets transferred? Is that on the horizon at all?
That's a really good question. I have not seen any developments on that front, unfortunately, to be able to answer that question.
It just seems crazy. In 2020, we're still chasing clients for payment, and clients saying, oh, I'm just not going to pay. I'm only going to pay a certain percentage. And these are law firms. They can sue you if you don't pay, right? But they still get away with it because they know it would cost more for the law firm to pursue that than just to drop it.
Yeah, and with COVID-19 as well, in some segments of the market in Australia, for example, big businesses, given that they have gone into hibernation, they have turned back to their law firms and say, we're not going to be paying our bills for 6 months, which is really tough, obviously, from a law firm cash flow perspective. But at the same time, if it's a key client, you kind of have to just bite the bullet. If it's a client that has been with the firm for over 5 or 10 years and has been absolutely profitable, it's only fair that you stuck it out for your clients and help them through this really, really tough times. An example I could think of are really in the airline industry, where flight capacity has been decreased by about 90%. So a lot of the airline carriers have essentially turned to their suppliers and say, we're not going to be paying our bills for at least 6 months.
Right.
Yeah.
All right. Now, if anyone who's listening to this wants to learn a little bit more about data analysis and innovation in law firms, where can they get in touch with you?
Yeah, so for all the attendees and your members, we'd be happy as well to provide a information pack on what are some of the things that you could be looking at from a data perspective. And also we'll provide our contact information, email address. You can contact us on LinkedIn as well. Alpha Creates is our company page. And yeah, we're available on social media as well as email.
Okay, excellent. Thanks so much for your time. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Will.